pretty warm out, and it just kind of reminds me of wanting to plant something in my garden. But there's a way to not make the fatal mistake of planting too early by planting the right things early. So in this video, we'll kind of talk about what we can plant early, what we shouldn't plant early, and then just kind of discussions around that. I think it'll kind of help open and broaden the horizon a little bit about planting, because I don't know about you, but when I start to feel just an inkling of warmth, I'm ready to get it in the ground and start planting. Garden's doing pretty good. It's been a couple days since we did the video about how everything lived through the frost, and I just want to give you a little update real quick. First of all, we got some heading broccoli that's getting a little bit bigger, but all the plants that look really weak, they've all rebounded. So I'm glad I didn't go crazy and start ripping stuff out of the ground faster than I should have. And that's basically across the board. There's a couple that we'll go ahead and remove just to remove them, but for the most part, everything's looking good and going in the right direction. But I want to talk about how we get really anxious and we're getting ready to work in the yard and the garden. And look, if you're somewhere where it's cold and you got snow on the ground right now, you can kind of just imagine this a month or so in the future and those same feelings you have. So welcome back to Sandy Bottom Homestead, everybody. My name is Ben. I am in coastal North Carolina, and today it is a very cloudy but 74 degrees, and that's a very warm day. You know what I'm saying? And it just reminds me of early spring. But what I know is my weather is going to change, and we'll start getting these days here and there that will really magnify that urge a lot faster. Let's get the first question out of the way. When do I plant? What is the date? Every single one of you are asking me, or asking yourselves and wanting me to tell you, give you a date to plant. Well, that's a really hard thing to do, but what we can do is we can do a little slight math equation, take it back to probably second grade math, just make a determination based on that. Now I will say real quick, if you want a custom planting schedule for your area, there's an email address below. Email me. I make them on Wednesdays and Fridays, and for a small fee I can get it to you and we can go through all that. But all right, so you got your first and last frost dates are very important days to remember. And it's your last frost date we're going to focus on for this conversation. So your last frost date for everything planted out here in my garden. Just to clarify exactly what's planted in no specific order. So not all of this goes in on the first date, but we've got radishes, turnips, Brussels sprouts, rutabagas, broccoli, cabbage, and bok choy, mustard, kale, collards, and you got your lettuces and stuff like that. So the hardiest of hardies, I would say roughly, and this is roughly now, you go back about 6 weeks from your last frost date, from your last frost date, you go back about 6 weeks. So mine is April 15th. That's my last frost date, meaning after April 15th, there's like a 10% chance of a frost date. So if we go back 6 weeks from that, that's March 1st. That's when I would put my least tender vegetables in. But that's specific to my area now, because you got to remember, every area is different. So for us, we're in what I call, well, right now we're in a yo-yo season. So it's hot, cold, hot, cold, hot, cold. And we're kind of getting into that winter groove. But then I also call this, and if you've listened to the Backyard Gardens podcast, and if you haven't, what are you waiting for? I mean, come on. It's available everywhere, and we even have now videos of it on YouTube. I call this the heartbreak zone, where you'll think you're going really good. You're in the 60s, repeatedly 70s, 40s at night, and then boom, it'll drop into the 20s. And that can be murder on some plants. Take you to the section of my garden, which has some of the stuff planted. I would plant 6 weeks from the last frost date. So bok choy, absolutely. And then you can see here, we've got some lettuce seedlings. These are just a total experiment just to see how they'll do. But we would put those in roughly about 6 weeks before our last frost date. And then so you go there, and then now we're gonna go, for me, roughly about a month ahead. And then we would start putting in, if we didn't already have it in, our cabbages, our broccolis, our kales and collards and mustard greens. You could do it, Brussels sprouts, all that stuff. So, you know, these are plants that you can plant a lot earlier than we would think. So you can see, based on the way my garden's set up right now, if I do, I'm trying to think of how I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do a bed of cabbage, a bed of broccoli, and then a bed of mixed greens, and then potatoes, we have to count those in too. So our potatoes, we put in almost 10 weeks before our last frost. So of the 7 beds here now, not including what's getting moved soon, we would have about 50% of our garden planted about 2 months before our last frost. And that's if we do any more. And the rutabagas as well can go, I keep getting stuff wrapped around my ankles. I thought this was a bug. Our rutabagas can go in very early as well. So, you know, these are plants that you can plant early. The reason why I bring up a fatal mistake is because a lot of people get excited and they want to start planting tomatoes and peppers and cucumbers and melons and squashes, and that's a big, big no-no. Can't stress this enough. Let the season of the garden shine. Let your spring garden be a spring garden. Let your summer garden be a summer garden. I mean, for God's sakes, what's the rush? You know, if you're listening to this or watching this and you've never planted a spring garden. When I say spring garden, I don't just mean like intermingling some lettuce plants in your tomato plants. That's not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is a completely spring planted garden, cold, hardy crops, cool season crops. You're missing out. I mean, truthfully, there's a way, and we'll get into this in the next video, to time everything out so that not only can you have a spring garden, but then you can turn around and plant your summer garden at the time of your harvesting. So there's a whole slew of things you can do, but you're not going to be really missing anything. And the thing is you may end up planting your, let's just pick tomatoes because they're simple. Tomatoes a little bit later. You may be putting them in the ground a little bit later, but they're going to grow the same. You're going to get the same harvest, but you're going to get a whole harvest from this entire bed so much earlier. I mean, it's crazy. So you're going to get multiple harvests, multiple plantings, and each season will have its time to shine. Let's talk about this 8 week after or before your last frost planting date. Seems crazy, but look, every single one of these garden beds has made it into about 18 degrees now. Every single one of them. We had very minimal losses. We did cover all the beds with hoops. We had covered to some extent. These 2 beds were covered appropriately. Actually, these 2 and this one was covered appropriately. And all of the other ones were not covered appropriately. They basically were not sealed off. And this one, for that matter, wasn't sealed off at all. And you can see it does have damage. It is showing damage, but it's still there. And the radishes, for instance, that I figured would be gone are still there. And so we can see that these can actually take a fair amount of cold. I mean, look, me outside in 17, 18 degrees with no blanket, I'm done, son. That's it. I'm over. It's all she wrote, man. I'm gonna freeze to death, or at least I'm gonna wish I was dead. I mean, it's just like we were camping the other week and I was talking to the guy I was sharing a tent with, and he was like, man, I've spent so many nights in a tent just praying for sun to come up. And that's the damn truth, you know. And these plants, they don't really do that, you know. We did cover them. We did make them a little bit more comfortable, but still. Now, if you had a tomato out here, there's no way. There's almost nothing you can do when the outside temperature gets that cold without adding electricity or going above and beyond. There's nothing you can do. And I know so many people, a lot of my plant sales come from people who plant their tomatoes too early. They get roasted and then, or they get frozen, not roasted, and then they're replacing them. And that's not something I want you to be in. I don't want you to be one of those customers. I want you to be one of those people that are comfortable with what you're growing and understanding when to get it in the ground. Let's attempt to get a solid list in about early plantings. So the early plantings for spring, right, your cool season crops, we're going to start at 8 weeks ahead of your last frost date, so before your last frost date. And it's going to start like this: snow peas. That can even be 10 weeks out. They're called snow peas for a reason. Snow peas. And then we're going to go 8 weeks out, and we're going to say cabbages, broccoli, kale, collards, and even direct sowing spinach within here. And then the next phase, which would be about 6 weeks out, then you could do spinach again, rutabagas, bok choy, mustard greens, potatoes can fall in this range anywhere. Potatoes can fall in. And then I'm not sure about Brussels sprouts, but I would put them at the earlier range as well. Somewhere between 8 and 6 weeks, I would put Brussels sprouts in. And then also at the 6 week mark, you have your turnips. And then 4 weeks out, I would do radishes, lettuce, and then you could start repeat sowing things and going in that direction, so you get more and more harvest in a period of time. Now, I'm sure I left some crops out, but you know, it is what it is. I can't get them all, but you can you can take each family, and you can notice in the trends and when I was talking, each family goes in earlier versus some families go in later and stuff like that. But remember, 18 degrees and look at this turnip bed. Look at the Brussels sprouts. Look at the bok choy, in which I already told you that they could go in weeks before the last frost date. One thing to remember though, very important, is when you see this garden bed and you see these like this and they sit here, and I've told you, they go through all of this time frame and they can take the cold. What we have to understand is these plants have made they've been gotten comfortable in the ground. They have very well established roots, and they're good to go. And that's really important. So understand that we're talking about putting seedlings or direct sowing in. And personally, I think direct sowing works a little bit better for some of them, because they will pop up when they're ready, versus a seedling's already off to the races and it's like, hey, let's get going. But it's hard to get a cabbage in the ground at the right time in order to time it out so we can get all of our summer crops in. So just think about that. And also around the 6 week mark, I forgot to say this, carrots. Carrots is another good one. 6 weeks to a month, you put them in, and then you're going in the right direction. So, and possibly even before that, it just really depends on your weather and where you are. And if you know your weather, and you know your climate and your microclimate for that matter, then you're really going to be in a good position for your garden in the early spring.